Okay, folks, good morning. First of all, can I thank you for the invitation to speak here and congratulate Alison on a tremendous survey of the issues that confront us with regard to social security in the UK. I'm tempted to say, if you have government by the wealthy for the wealthy, what do you expect? But I'm sure it is. But I think there are central issues that we have to discuss relating to the erosion of democracy, the creation of a society where essentially financial services and corporatism are in control, the outsourcing, the privatisation, which is leading to so much poverty, and the lack of concern for people in the bottom of half of our society, and indeed people outside the southeast. Nevertheless, I'm here to address the situation in Northern Ireland and the report of the Mitigation Working Party. I should say that when I was asked to do this in sort of early November, my instinct was to get on the nearest plane out. However, I reflected upon the position. You will all remember that we were in crisis. We were being fined £2 million a week for not implementing welfare reform. We had a phantom budget. The budgets of individual departments were going to go into crisis shortly, and things were looking fairly grim. And when I talked to people, it seemed that they had come up with this idea. There would be this working party to address this issue that has held up everything for 5 years. And I did try to decline, and you should have seen the look of panic on their faces. There was no plan B. So it seemed to me that what we should try to do was develop a strategy which would not protect everybody in perpetuity. Clearly, there will be losers. But nevertheless, try to develop a strategy which would take account of how badly things have gone for people on low incomes in GB and see if we could mitigate it in some way. So what I'm going to do is provide an overview of the main points. It'd be helpful if we had a bit more light here, actually. Is there a light on this thing? That's it. I can see my own handwriting there, thank you. That's no assistance, by the way. Anyway, so in essence what we've been doing is looking at the worst things that have been going on in GB and saying, right, what can we do in Northern Ireland to alleviate, to mitigate the stress that would otherwise occur. So I'll give a brief overview of that, and then I'll deal with, at the end, with some of the things that have caused most concern, notably the underspend and the issue of conflict-related injury. What we've seen in GB over the last few years is thousands and thousands of people, millions of people, being made worse off, but also quite often simply dumped out of the benefit system and left to fend for themselves. It has been quite appalling. You wouldn't have thought this would happen in a civilised society. That is the long and short of it. Our report is about, not as I say, assisting people in perpetuity, because that is impossible, but it is about giving people a breathing space, providing support, providing protection, and trying to help people rather than abandoning them. And that's the core point. The strategy we've recommended has 3 strands. You've all got access to the report, so I'm not going to go over it in detail. The first strand consists of temporary payments and other measures for carers, contributory ESSA claimants who are not in the support group, and those affected by the abolition of DLA for those of working age, plus families affected by the benefit cap. So we've got a stream of recommendations here. For example, for claimants of contributory ESSA, there'll be a 3-month warning from the Social Security Agency advising the person that their entitlement is coming to an end. Then there will be an automatic check made by the Social Security Agency to see if the person can drop down onto income-related ESSA. And then if neither of those measures are of assistance to the claimant, there will be a payment, supplementary payment, for 1 year, equivalent to the benefit lost. So we've done that at all sorts of points. Now, typically the payments that we've proposed in this first strand will last for 1 year, though the help for families with the benefit cap will be for longer. On the one hand, with regard to the first strand and with regard to these supplementary payments for these different groups, I would have liked to have recommended more generous payments. On the other hand, it should be remembered that many in these groups will benefit from the full mitigation of the bedroom tax. We're not going to have it here for the next 4 years. So that means that the mess and the disaster that has been visited upon so many people in GB will not happen in Northern Ireland. So we've got to remember, first of all, the temporary payments will, for many people, be underwritten by the mitigation of the bedroom tax. Alongside that, of course, it is very important to say that one of the reasons why the bedroom tax has gone so horribly wrong is its utter insensitivity to the needs of people with disability. So many of the people who are falling into the groups for temporary payments will also have a protection with regard to the bedroom tax or not being subjected to it. And there won't be the sense here that disabled people have had in GB that it's one thing after another. We will not be doing that here. The second strand is about advice and protecting people from the inappropriate application of sanctions. And I should say that in the discussions I had with the SPADs and whoever else before commencing this work, I made it very clear that the cornerstone of much that we would recommend would relate to advice and representation. And Kevin Higgins, who has worked alongside me in all of this, has done a terrific job in putting together that part of the report that sets out the advice and representation strategy. So we're talking about 8 million over 4 years. With regard to sanctions, we're all aware of the appalling outworkings of this part of the legislation in GB. In Northern Ireland, we'll be dealing with this in a unique way. First of all, under the legislation, the Joint Standards Committee will have responsibility for monitoring and reporting upon the operation of sanctions. So the chaos that has occurred across the water should not occur here, because as chair of the Standards Committee, I will be looking at these decisions. And indeed, I am due to have a meeting with the relevant staff in the agency next week, so we sort out how we're going to manage this monitoring and reporting responsibility. So we will be looking at the decisions of decision makers and saying, right, in particular, did the decision maker address the issue of good cause? And beyond that, correct application of the legislation, sufficiency of evidence and all the rest of it. So all of the criteria that we currently apply to decision making in Social Security Agency will be applied to sanctions. Alongside that, we're also going to see some reorganisation of the jobs and benefits offices, which we've recommended. There has been this horrible split over the last number of years between Dell and Social Security Agency staff. It doesn't work. It leads to all sorts of complications, misinformation and confusion. So that's why in the report we recommended reorganisation of JBOs so that we have a single integrated team managing the thing from the time the person first comes through the door to the point where the decision maker makes a decision. And that, I think, will also assist. And then across, on top of that, there will be, and we have recommended, a special helpline for people who are sanctioned, and decision makers will be required to give information on the helpline to persons who are sanctioned. So we clearly will have some people who slip through the net, but we have done our best with that package to try to manage what has been a really bad situation over there. Also in the community projects, in one of the community projects that we've suggested, we have this idea of reaching the hard to reach, in the sense that you could have an advisor saying this and you could have somebody in an advice centre doing that. We have a problem with people with addiction problems, transient lifestyles and whatnot, and it is very hard to get to them. They may not understand that something has changed, they may not understand why they've lost their benefit, they may not understand that help is available. So this is where we pinch the clothes of the Scots, actually. There is this idea that all of these people will be in touch with somebody, whether it's the person who's managing the hostel, the person in Sure Start, the health visit or whatever. So the idea is to build up a network so that those people, they're not going to be turned into benefits experts, but they are going to be turned into, we hope, signposts, so that people in difficulty can get advice and say, right, this is where you can get help. So we've got a lot of emphasis on that. And then the third strand looks forward to, I think that's the wrong phrase somehow, looks forward to the introduction of universal credit. Oh dear, what was I thinking about when I wrote that? My sense about universal credit from the outset is that it was just a recipe for catastrophe. I thought it was too big, I thought it was too complicated, I thought the IT would never be made to work. I lived through, with the Child Support Agency, their IT catastrophe, and it was years of grief. So the notion that we could do something more complicated and make that work struck me as strange from the outset. I think we all live in the hope that the thing will fall to pieces before we have to implement it in Northern Ireland. Nevertheless, I suppose we've got to prepare for the worst, because we are making provisions for other things, as I say. So what we're doing in Northern Ireland is, first of all, the benefit will be administered differently. So that will prevent hardship, and the default position will be fortnightly payment plus payment to landlords. We will also have split payments, although I'm not sure how different that is to what occurs across the water. Additionally, alongside that, we will have some compensation for those on low wages, for whom support will be reduced. The precise detail, I did some calculations on the back of an envelope, but I'm not going to get into that. A lot of work has to be done on that by the Discretionary Support Commissioner, provided for under the legislation. We've also recommended that there should be emergency payments to prevent hardship if the IT for universal credit fails. Because it is quite, clearly there are provisions whereby people can get loans, but if the state can't deliver a benefit, it shouldn't assist people by getting them into greater indebtedness. And then finally, we have made recommendations for various kinds of community projects that we would want to see supported. Like Alison, I'm astounded that I'm into food poverty. Who on earth would have thought, second decade of the 21st century, we're an advanced, or supposed to be, an advanced economy, and we're blethering on about food strategies. Nevertheless, you have to recognise the world you live in, and you have to cope with it. And it's not simply food banks, as I think the appendix in our report shows, put together very well, I thought, by Liz Mitchell. They're actually thinking of very, very different kinds of things, not just the tired old food bank. We need to think of ways that help people but maintain their dignity, and so on. So that very, very quickly, and obviously I hope you'll all read the report. Last week when the report was launched, it was a totally miserable experience, because I knew that the journalists who were present at the launch wouldn't have often read the report. 4 of them weren't interested. One was just there from Nolan to make mischief, and at least one other struck me as barking mad. Anyway, I think it is very important that the advice sector, that you read the report, you understand and explain to people. Now, in a sense, our work is finished. Because it now is a matter for the Social Security Agency to operationalise all of this. We've said you're going to do this, and Tommy is going to have to do that, because the report is through. This is the end of the debate. That's it. There have been a number of concerns, or some concerns raised about the report, and the big one, of course, has been the underspend. Now, in any other country, bringing a project in underspend would be greeted as a triumph. In Northern Ireland, it has been endlessly criticised and nitpicked. If I could just explain how this worked. Peter Robinson didn't just say to me, right, Eileen, here's 585 million and away you go. That is not how public finance works. In Northern Ireland, we work on an annual accounting basis, and I think it's 3 years in GB, which makes their lives rather easier. I think this is a legacy from Mark Durkin Sr. And I'm familiar with this because I have, of course, been a non-executive director with various health trusts for many years. So every year you have to break even. Every year you get the budget and you land the elephant on the sixpence at the end of the year by breaking even. And the budget we were given, I don't think it was appropriate for this kind of exercise. But nevertheless, the budget we were given wasn't a single block of 585 and away you go, spend it like as you wish. It was 8 different envelopes. 2 envelopes for 216-17, 2 envelopes for 217-18, 2 envelopes, etc. So 8 different envelopes with the money locked in there. Now that was clearly a problem for us, because it was obvious to me by mid-December, and this was one of the times where I really thought this isn't doable and I'm going to throw the towel in. It was obvious to us by mid-December that there was going to be a problem, because we would have an underspend at the beginning, because you can't compensate people for benefits lost until they've lost them. So we'd have to wait for the whole thing to swing in, and then the change from making the cuts via universal credit from tax credits didn't help. So we knew that there'd be an underspend, or I suspected, because we hadn't got all the figures done. You never know that you're in a hole till you're at the bottom of it. So we knew that there was probably going to be an underspend then, and then we would have less money to spend on things we wanted to do later in the process. So that was the problem. We did devise a way of getting round this, and we did actually present costings where we spent the lot, but nevertheless we couldn't get past this sort of rigid approach to public finance. You can't move money from one year to the next or 2 years across. You can't move money from one envelope to the next. So, I mean, coming up to Christmas, it didn't seem like a good time to start a row and unpick the whole thing all over again. And therefore, having made one attempt to get past this, we decided, right, we'll just have to come in with an underspend. I didn't like it any more than anybody else. On the other hand, we did have a discussion with Arlene Foster and McGuinness, and I said, well, okay, we've got an underspend. If that goes to, I mean, we knew that health was in real trouble, and therefore if that goes to health, then we can live with it, and it's not that bad. But that's how the underspend rose. It didn't occur because I decided not to spend the cash. Certainly we couldn't have done all sorts of things that we would have liked to have done, and the issue is if you get into this kind of game, you either keep stopping keep stopping the process. We do this in Northern Ireland to such an extent. Can anybody bear it any longer? My sense was head down, get what we can, and get through. We also had a very strange reaction from the press with regard to the conflict-related injury payments. I step over the rather bizarre comments to do with bombers blowing themselves up and whatever. But leaving that aside, some people really did have difficulty with this. So just to sort of reiterate the thinking here. We're fairly clear, I mean there are differences with regard to the figures, but we're fairly clear that we'll get the majority of people on DLA across to PIP. We've done very well in terms of the transition from incapacity to ESSA. We watch that every step of the way, and we've got a rising number of people in the support group. We're up to now 70% when the original estimate, and the English, the GB, they're panicking because it's 50%. We've got 70% and proud of it. I'm not chair of this committee for nothing. So I know that we, the agency and the committee and the advice sector, will work incredibly hard to get people across to PIP. As I say, we've seen estimates saying 80%, we can see if it go higher. So the majority of people on PIP will make it across to, on DLA will make it across to PIP. However, we also know, and it's a general problem across the UK, that PIP is very unhelpful to those with mental health problems. We also know that in Northern Ireland we have a dreadful legacy of mental ill health as a result of 30 years conflict. Now, you just can't ignore that. We can't pretend we're living in Surrey or Sussex or somewhere like that. We're all very aware of the deep trauma that so many people have. So this measure, and I think we could have expressed it more clearly, but this measure with regard to conflict-related injury is about addressing that problem, saying, right, if you've got a mental health problem, the assessment doesn't help you, and if you've been gone through particularly traumatic circumstances, we will sort of move the goalpost slightly so that you get onto a supplementary payment for 1 year. So that's the difficulty. It's mental health, particular problem in Northern Ireland, trying to move people across. So those are very, very quickly some of the main issues around the report. I should say, I mean, I did say when I was doing my expenses claim form, can I claim for sleepless nights? Because I really did worry that we might not be able to do this. Nevertheless, we've got it done. It's not great. I'd like to have been more generous, but nevertheless, we're past that horrible obstacle. We've got the thing done. We've got a strategy, which I don't see any place else around. I mean, I think the Scots have done very well, but not elsewhere. And therefore, it is now, as I say, up to the agency, up to the advice sector to make this work. Thank you very much.